Hello everyone. Okay, I hope we're all well and happy. So, what we're going to start off this session is about the Tsars and industrial policy. So, before the summer holidays, we did all the agriculture stuff. So, you remember all that stuff about trying to improve agriculture under the Tsars, and we had Stolypin and all those different reforms which he tried to make. We then had the First World War, if you remember, and the fact that they couldn't grow enough food to feed the troops, which became quite a big feature in the failures of the First World War. And then we had the communists, didn't we, and agriculture. So we had all stuff about collectivization under Stalin, we had the reforms made by Khrushchev at the very end. So we should be fine on the agriculture stuff. So obviously this next week we're going to focus on industrialization under in Russia as well. So this first little talk is going to be about industrialization under the Tsars. Now, it probably won't be a great surprise to you to realise that Russia in 1855, when Alexander II becomes the Tsar, it wasn't particularly very well industrialised. If you think back to Britain in the 1850s, this is when we had, the Victorian age, with all the railways that were being built everywhere, the big factories in places like Manchester and Birmingham and Coventry and all these big cities, a lot of heavy industry, a lot of clink and clank, that was taking place, and the free market capitalism, etc., etc., etc. Well, Russia in 1855, in comparison, was pretty backwards. There was not anywhere near that many railways, for example. There was nowhere near that many factories. It was really behind industrially. And of course, this had a big effect on the Crimean War, because in the Crimean War, Britain and the Allies were able to, use that heavy industry to produce the guns they needed and the, cannons and whatever else you needed for war in the 1850s, whereas the Russians did not have the same resources. So therefore, it was almost like an issue of national importance that Russia needed to industrialise, A, to catch up with the West in terms of money and finance, but also for military purposes as well, in order to have the industry so they could then, produce the weapons that they might need to protect themselves or do whatever it is they needed to do. So they were kind of the motives, really, of the Tsars. And interestingly, you'll find that some of those same motives were there for Stalin later on as well. This idea that Russia needs to be as industrialized as the Western powers in order to A, protect itself, protect the revolution, and also to deal with his ambitions as well. So if you're doing an essay about industrialization or something, there's actually quite an interesting similarity, really, between the Tsars and the communists, that they both recognise the need to industrialise for quite similar reasons. Anyhow, we're going to focus on the Tsars, so obviously Alex, and Nick, regarding industrialization. And you will have noticed, to your delight and horror, in your work booklet, which you should still have somewhere, there's a 2-page thing about industrialization. So it starts off with Alexander II Reuten's industrial reforms. He was one of his ministers responsible for this, one of his finance ministers, and there are 4 or 5 questions based on him about the railways that were built, etc., etc. And then you'll notice you got Witt. So you got the stuff about its economic development as well, with Nikolai Bunge and Ivan, someone unpronounceable. We've already come across this Ivan character, because when we did that stuff about the famines, he's the guy that basically said, let them starve, basically, because we need to make cash still. Then the really important guy we've got next is Witt and the so-called Great Spurt, which isn't some kind of euphemism. And again, there's 3 or 4 questions based on that. So what you need to do, you need to use the textbook, Russia and Its Rulers by Holland. I'm going to scan it now and put it onto Moodle. So you need to use it. It's on page 70 something. So use the book as the basis for doing all those questions about Witt and Reuten. Feel free to look at any other books or resources you can find. See if you can find anything else about this as well, because the more detail we get, the better. And then you'll notice at the bottom of the worksheet, it says, making links with the past. How were the policies, ideas and motives of Witt and Reuten similar, and how were they different? So this is important for these essay questions, isn't it, where you're looking at similarities and differences across the period. Were Witt and Reuten in a similar kind of line in terms of their industrialization policy? What ways were they similar? That'd be quite nice to put into an essay. And was there any differences between the two? There might not be. See what you can find out. I'm not going to tell you now. So this is only a quick short video. So by the time you've done this work, you should have a pretty good idea the general kind of direction which the Tsars took regarding industrialization, the motives which they had for industrialization. I'll be thinking as well perhaps a little bit about how successful they both were. And then what we'll do in the next video, we'll talk about the First World War, we'll do Lenin's industrialization, and then of course our friend Mr. Stalin did a bit of it as well. Okay, any problems or questions on this, send me an email. Yeah, so this is and I'll do the next video, I don't know, it might be the weekend perhaps, or early next week, something like that. Okay.